email. And the reason we're asking for email is we're going to send you some materials after this webinar, and that will facilitate us gathering your emails to send you those materials. So if you just introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, role, and email, that would be really helpful for us.
Yes, thank you so much for doing that. So we're going to get started. Thank you again for putting your name and email and maybe what school you're working with currently here in Montana into the chat box, or if you're an OPI full-time staff, right, just a reminder of what your role is. So again, our goals for the session today is to build a better understanding of the Smarter Balanced Assessment System so that you all are able to relay that to the schools that you work with or all of the schools here in the state. Second is we are going to provide you materials you can use with schools to facilitate training on interim assessments. And also these are materials that you could just share with your school, so maybe a curriculum director or a teacher or whomever who is interested in using Smarter Balanced Interim Assessments in their schools. Again, I guess the last goal is also just to answer any questions that have come up if you've used interim assessments already or are working with schools that have done that.
Okay. Well, we're going to focus largely on one part of our balanced assessment system here in Montana, but I just wanted to give you a little background and framework on the balanced assessment system here. When Montana was selecting what summative end-of-year assessments they were going to go with several years ago, we wanted to make sure that we selected something that didn't just offer a simple or sometimes not as simple end-of-year summative assessment, but also offered supports for teachers and students throughout the year and really helping to support instruction. And so going with Smarter Balance provides this end-of-year summative assessment. They provide formative assessment information, and they also provide interim assessments. And what we're going to focus on today are really these interim assessments that are available for all teachers in Montana. And the reason that that Marissa and I, being instructional coordinators, really like to share out about the interims because they bridge that assessment and instruction for teachers. So it's really a way that teachers can get some very actionable data to guide their instruction with their students. The interim assessments that Smarter Balance provides are flexible, they're open, and they're, it's a great way for teachers to use for themselves and in the way that works best for them in their teaching situation and in their school. And you'll hear a little bit more about that flexibility as we go forward. These are all SBAC created, so all of the items in these interim assessments have gone through the same rigorous process that the actual summative testing items have gone through. Some of them are retired items from the summative test. And so that we know that these interim assessments really align directly to those summative tests. They're online, so it's a great practice for students to practice this online test-taking format. And then there are items that the computer scores, and then there are items for teachers that teachers will need to score themselves or hand score in the interims, and we'll give you a little bit more specific information on what items those are and what those look like. But also the teacher then can generate online reports and really dig into what their students understood, what their students didn't understand, and then have some resources to help support their next step instruction.
So next we want to clarify
I think you're still muted, Marissa.
Oh. Thanks, Christy. Next, we wanted to clarify who can administer interim assessments. So again, the roles are similar to the roles that you have given as the OPI Montcast system, right? So those test security roles, we assign here OPI. It's kind of that point person, that DA or DC district test coordinator at every school, and then within that school, that district administrator or district test coordinator can go ahead and assign roles to teachers. In order to administer interim assessments, teachers need to be assigned as TEs or teachers. The other option is a TA. TAs can administer interim assessments, but they cannot see the results. So when you're assigning or having your teachers or you're working with schools and having them set up how their system looks like and how they're assigning roles to teachers, make sure their teachers are TEs. That way they can both administer and access data afterwards. We also district coordinators can also upload rosters, school test coordinators can do that, and teachers can also help with that. Viewing test scores, right, as a district administrator or district test coordinator, school test coordinator, teacher, you can also go ahead and view student scores. As a teacher, you can only see the student scores that are either assigned to your roster or that you've administered the assessment towards. So there is that level of privacy for teachers, but school test coordinators, district administrators, and district test coordinators can go ahead and see all of their students' data from their school. There's more information about these user roles that I wanted to just pull up for you all. If you have any questions, they're going to be linked here, linked in the slide. But if there are any questions about user roles or how your school needs to be assigned in order to administer these interim assessments or to see data, we have this user roles and accessing to the Montcast systems for 2018-2019 document that is linked in there. Again, that can be found on the Smarter Balance homepage and also through Tide, that system there. But just so that you kind of have an idea of who can access what. As many of you are consultants, right, you might not have a direct user role yourself, but that's up to the district to kind of decide who can go ahead and be assigned different roles within that district and part of the Montcast total assessment system. So our next slide is about who's currently using them. We have some data from last year. Those two graphs are from last year. We went ahead and kind of figured out how many schools and how many tests were just administered in Montana through the 2017 and 2018 year. You'll see that the big pickup started happening in January last year. We've had a lot of schools starting to use the interim assessments, and we are super excited about that. Last year, though, we had about, I think it ended up being about over 20,000 tests, 25,000 tests were administered for these IABs, and we'll go over what the difference between IABs and ICA assessments are. In the ICAs, we also had a big chunk, about 2,000 tests were administered in the state of Montana. As of January 7th, 2019, so this year, we've already kind of doubled that. I mean, we're already above the number of ICAs completed and IABs at this point. So more schools are using them in Montana. We have about 25 schools have used ICAs already this year, and 41 schools in Montana have already done an IAB. So we are seeing the growth in schools, and so that's also why we are hopefully partnering with you all so that you can also disseminate information about interim assessments or answer any questions that come up, and encourage schools to go ahead and take a look at them and see if that's something that it would be part of their instructional practice. Again, interim assessments are completely optional, right? They are part of this balanced assessment system, but we really do see the value in their instructional purpose.
Great. Next, let's give a little clarification on the two different types of interim assessments that Smarter Balanced provides. First, the Interim Comprehensive Assessment, or ICAs, are the same blueprint and length as the summative assessment. So this means that students are going to have an ELA section, a math section, an ELA performance task, and a math performance task. The grade information that teachers can get from this particular assessment is that the scaling and the scoring that they get from this test will look like the summative assessment scoring. So that really will align directly to that summative score. But it is time consuming for teachers to administer, for students to take, and then for teachers to grade the hand scoring afterwards. Some of the items are electronically scored, but some those performance tasks are all hand scored for this interim comprehensive assessment. The interim assessment blocks are much more manageable for teachers to administer, sort of throughout one class period. And when we've talked to schools, it's taking about one class period between 50 minutes to an hour to administer these interim assessment blocks. And they are small sets of related concepts. So you'll have 10 to 15 questions on one particular concept, whether in math or ELA. And they can really provide detailed instructional focus for teachers. It can really give them that instructional feedback so they know in this particular topic area or this particular claim area, how did their students do? What are their students missing? What did their students understand? And again, these items are electronically and hand scored as well.
So a little bit about the offerings. Again, Christy said the ICA is that full fixed form test followed by the performance task. That would be that full ICA. But here are the IABs that are offered for grades 3 through 8 for math. You'll notice that little symbol down in the corner are indicate that their hand scoring has to be done. So for math, the majority of these interim assessments are already computer scored items. They're not multiple choice questions per se, right? There are some multiple choice, right? But there are different types of questions, and we'll kind of give you a preview of that later on. But the only ones that teachers will have to go in there and manually score are in the performance task. If you also notice, you'll see that the titles are broken up by content domain. So again, why we love interim assessments is they are directly aligned to our Montana content standards, to the point of that they are assessing exactly those standards by those broken into content domains for math. So those are the offerings for IABs for interim assessments for math.
And for ELA, you see the offerings here. The little red mark indicates that those items have hand scoring that the teacher will have to do. And so for the interim assessment blocks, it's usually a brief write. So you can see there's a little more hand scoring in the ELA sections than there are in the math sections. But generally, this is a 2-point rubric, brief write. And for the student, it's generally writing about a paragraph or so, and then graded on a 0, 1, or 2-point rubric. And it's the way I think of these brief writes for teachers is it really measures the skill for the students, and the teacher can really quickly see with a 0, 1, or 2 how their students are doing on this particular skill, on this particular writing task for that interim assessment block. So it's just sort of a quick and easy way and glance and look at particular skill sets for students. The performance tasks for ELA are graded on a larger rubric, 10 points altogether, a 4-point organizational rubric, a 4-point elaboration rubric, and a 2-point convention rubric. So the performance tasks will be longer to grade and take a little bit more time for teachers after the interims have been administered.
So our next slide is kind of say, how do we find interim assessments? So your teachers or the schools that you work with will be used to the Montana portal .aris.org's site, right? That is where they've gone for the past couple of years to administer their summative exam. This is also where they will find their interim assessments. So the first button that we want to mention to you all is first they'll sign in and they'll hit that System and Test Administrator button. And once they're onto this kind of home page screen, the first one is this assessment viewing application. This is where teachers can go ahead and see all of the interim assessments that are provided ahead of time and actually go through those 10 to 15 items if they're doing an IAB, or even look at the entire ICA ahead of time, right? The goal of the interim assessments is not necessarily to give them blind, right, or not know what's on them, right? This is smarter, balanced way of making sure that teachers and schools and students kind of get a preview of what are on these summative assessments. What is the level of rigor? What are the question types, the item types? What do the directions look like? All of that ahead of time. So I would encourage all teachers, even if they decide to administer interims to their students or not, to check out the assessment viewing application. There they can go ahead and check out all of the question types, preview them, and take a deeper look into what kind of questions are being offered. We love this also because it also is that alignment to our content standards, right? So we also, we've had a lot of teachers who open this file and might say, I'm not teaching that in 3rd grade. Oh, it looks like it actually is a 3rd grade standard. Oh, okay, we need to maybe incorporate this into our curriculum. Or, hey, this seems like it's a content that is really important and we only spend 1 day on it. Why is this? And it brings up those kind of conversations as well, which is a great place to start for schools. So that's all in the assessment viewing application to give that preview of what do these look like ahead of time. Again, we don't want teachers to necessarily give them blind, right? We want them to know what they're administering to their students. The second button is this test administration button. Teachers are familiar with it. They use this. It's the exact same process as the summative assessment. Ahead of time, teachers will need to have completed that test administration certification. They'll need to have those secure browsers uploaded onto all their student computers ahead of time, and it runs exactly the same. They go in here, they choose from a drop-down menu of which interim they would like to administer to their student or to their class. That red stop sign will show up with the testing code. It'll also post up front. So it looks exactly the same as the summative assessment testing platform. This is also a great way for students and for teachers to get comfortable with that a testing process on the computer. With kids have to write the code in, they have to also have their SBAC ID and their first name in order to sign into their logins. So it kind of gets over all of that step before the summative. I would say it relieves anxiety for both teachers and for students by administering these interim assessments ahead of time and practicing just how to get these things running. And so that is all done through the test administration block. The next button is the Airways reporting system. This is where teachers are going to go to get their results. They'll go ahead and they'll log into the Airways reporting system, and that's where they're going to do the hand scoring if the interim assessment requires hand scoring, and then they also can see their final results. And we'll give you a sneak preview of what that's going to look like for teachers and what data they can collect from interim assessments. Again, the value of interims is that they can actually collect data. They can see all their students' responses. They can go ahead and really have a better understanding of where their students are at with this grade level content. And the last button is the digital library. This is Smarter Balance's formative component of the balanced assessment system. So it's that third piece. And this provides lesson plans, activities, ideas for teachers on what to do next. So after they've administered an interim, there's a nice link from that interim assessment to like, hey, it seems your kids need to work on this. Here are a couple lesson plan ideas or activities that you might want to try out with your student, and that all can be found on the digital library. So those are kind of the key buttons when it comes to administering interim assessments.
And once teachers hit into this first button that we chatted about, the assessment viewing application button, this is what they'll see. They'll see options. This is the grade 5 option, but you can see all of the interim assessment block options in yellow. Those are, again, those shorter one class period topic specific 10 to 15 question blocks. And you can see those here, and the teachers can go right in, see what the questions are going to be, and really choose the interim assessment that aligns with what they're instructing right then, and it can give them some very valuable instructional information. The green here on the lower right are the interim comprehensive assessments. So those are, again, the longer, full-on sort of mimicking the summative assessment forms. And just to note that all of these interims are fixed form, which means they're the same questions. They are not responsive to how students answer the questions like the summative is. They're fixed. It's the same questions for each time. And students can take these interims again. They can take them twice or 3 times. Obviously, we're not trying to test our students so much, but it is an option that they can go and take it again, but they'll get the same questions again.
So we're going to pause here for a second for questions. We'll probably just pause for the next 30 seconds, so feel free to either throw it into the chat box or just unmute yourself on the call. And
sorry, Marissa, you're on mute again, I think.
Oh my gosh, sorry everyone. We're just going to take a second to pause for questions. If you'd like to either chat into the box or go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask your question, we'll do that. So we'll just pause for 30 seconds to answer any questions.
Can students take ICAs below their grade level is one of the questions that just came through on the chat. And yes, the students can take the interims at a different grade level, but it is not automatically assigned. The test coordinator will need to go in and assign those individual students to that grade level.
Yep. So students are automatically, if they're in 7th grade, they're automatically able to take 7th grade interim assessments, either the IABs or the ICAs. If you want that 7th grader to take a 6th grade exam or a 5th grade exam, you'll need to go into the student roster and actually under each student page and say, this kid can, it's a drop-down menu with a multiple slide, this kid can take 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, yeah, they could take all of them, or maybe you have a couple kids that you want them to be testing at a different grade level, right? You can choose which grades you'd like to administer to them. You do need to go, this is done through TIDE, and it is done in the rosters and at the individual student level. But we have a link at the end also for Measured Progress. They're our vendor who hosts the site, and they can hopefully answer that question with a more streamlined directions of step by step. But yes, you can do it. It's through TIDE. It's in the student rosters, and you do need to go into each individual student and to assign what grade levels you'd like them to be able to test at. If it's different than their current grade level that they are in.
And the computer scored results are available right after testing unless there is a hand scoring component. And it's not necessarily right away. It may sometimes take 24 hours for those results to come into the system. But if there is hand scoring, the computer results will not show up until the hand scoring results are done. So hand scoring needs to be completed for teachers to see the results of even the computer section. Unless there's no hand scoring for that particular IEB, then the results will show up usually within 24 hours, right, Marissa? I think that's...
Yep, they'll show up within 24 hours. Usually it's quicker than that, but yes, the hand scoring does have to be done first in order to see their students' results. I just have pulled up a few items just to give you an idea of what these question types look like for those who maybe are not as familiar with the Smarter Balanced testing platform. We can't necessarily show you the secure interim assessments because again, while they are for schools and they are for teachers and they are for students to use, these interim assessments are not the ones that are going to be sent home to parents. They're not the ones that are they shouldn't be posted online because they are secure and that there's only one form. We will show you a couple other places, but just to get you an idea of what these questions look like, here is a third grade math item where they had to go ahead and enter in 2 different responses into the text box. And this is all just through the sample items. We'll show you where to find these ahead of time. These are public ones open to domain, but again, this would be, we can learn about more about this item. This would be in concepts and procedures, and this is an example of what would be in a interim assessment. We also have items such as this, which are those highlighting items. Oops, sorry. Where students are doing a reading. Again, this is a 3rd grade sample, I think. 3rd grade sample. They're doing a reading, and then they have some of these what we call hot texts, and they're selecting sentences that they think would be the best conclusion or one thing that would best support their work. Again, so these are not necessarily just multiple choice, right? There's lots of different forms of the question types. But I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like for those who are maybe not as familiar with what these kind of assessments look like. Here was another item of a reading with choosing a multiple select, right? So closer to a multiple choice, but again, picking 2 choices, etc. And we actually were working with one school yesterday who said that some of their strongest students didn't understand the direction of choosing 2, right? Which is completely understandable. And so this is also a great place to kind of practice those skills. Here's an example from the listening interim assessment. And again, they'll listen to a segment and then they can answer. This one just is more of a traditional multiple choice. So just to give you an idea of what these questions kind of look like, and we'll show you places where the released items are that are accessible to everyone, and also the interim ones are available to any teacher here in Montana that has an account that's set up by their school. Yep, and we're definitely going to show you the score report. Great. Feel free to continue to throw questions into the chat if there's anything that you want answered as we go through. So a couple things, and we did just kind of answer this, right? The first one is a reminder again that the biggest kind of, let's say, hang up we've gotten from schools is that their teachers were enrolled as TAs instead of TEs. Make sure teachers are enrolled as teachers, and that way they can administer the interim assessments, hand score them if need be, and see the results. So make sure that they're enlisted as TEs. Again, if the teacher is not administering the interim assessment, so perhaps I'm the curriculum director and I decided I'd like to administer it to everyone, and I'm going to be like, pulling classes, so maybe the grade level teacher is not administering the assessment to the students, you need to create rosters within the system and assign teachers to those rosters. That is all done through Tide, and again, we'll have a link for Measure Progress who can send you those step-by-step instructions on how to do that. But let's say if I'm the curriculum director and I administer it to everyone, but the third grade teacher is not assigned to those third grade students, that third grade teacher is not going to be able to see those results. So we'll need to make sure that the third grade teachers are assigned to the third grade students. If the third grade teacher administers it themselves, they'll be able to see the results anyway. But if, let's say, someone else pulled the kids aside and administered them, we'll need to make sure that that third grade teacher is assigned to that third grade roster so that they can see their kids' results. We adjust this again. Kids may take different grade levels. If you'd like to try to administer a different grade level ahead of time, we've seen different schools use this in different ways, sometimes with just 1 or 2 students that they want to give it a try with, or maybe a grade level or a class period or something, but they'll have to go ahead and be reassigned in Tide as multiple select, like they can take a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th grade interim assessments. So again, they're only defaulted to be able to take tests that are in their grade level. The last thing that's linked here that we wanted to show you is we've created a 1-pager, like a how-to guide for administering interim assessments. This will also be sent to you and it's going to be posted on the OPI website, but just how to administer interim assessments, that step-by-step guide. So before administering interims, that's that reminder about getting the computer set up, having teachers take the test administration certification, printing out the student's first name and their SBAC ID numbers, and kind of have that scrap paper ready to go. What happens during testing and how do we actually go ahead and pick a test to administer to students? And then what we're going to finish covering today is how I go ahead and get my reports afterwards. And these are the 3 kind of different tabs and goes into details about how to get reports. So that's one resource for you all, and I'll just share that into the chat right now to have as you go, but we'll email it to you all as well. So where do I get my reports? You get your reports in ARE's reporting system. Here is an example of what your reports might look like. This is again after, if there was any hand scoring required, this is where they'll get the reports after they've finished that hand scoring. Students will be listed on the left. They'll go ahead and be given a below, an at, or above, or an at / near standard. For interim assessment blocks, so these are the IABs, those shorter ones, they actually only give 3 levels of performance. The reason why is that Smarter Balance says, well, it's only 10 to 15 questions. We can't really say if they're at / near. So you're like, okay, fine, we'll take 3 buckets instead of 4 buckets, which is the traditional summative results. The ICAs, those full-length interim assessments, do break up those scores into 4 components because they're mimicking exactly the summative exam. So that's why there's only 3 buckets here. You'll be able to see the 5 items in which the students performed the best in the class, and the 5 items in which the students, again, did not perform as well on, or you can just check out each item by item. By clicking on here, you'll be able to see the item again. Oh yeah, what was question 1? What was the rubric for it? What was the answer? You also can go ahead and see the percent that got it, or I guess the average score for each item. Here it was out of 1 point. So in this class, 69% of the class got question 1 correct. If you'd like to go ahead and see what the student actually put down, so let's say in question 2, this student didn't get question 2 correct because they got 0 points, and you want to see what did they put down, you can go ahead and click right onto that 0, and it will show what that student put down, if they put down what response they put down and how it was incorrect. Here's kind of a little deeper view, right? Here's that, this kid got number 11 wrong. Okay, here was the question. All right, he hit that. The answer was actually shade. And it also goes into that kind of detailed items about the rubric of what claims does this fall in, what's the target that it's following, what standards is it hitting, and also what's that level of difficulty. So again, is it slated as an easy, a moderate, or a difficult question? You'll also see that little pencil here. That means that this teacher hand scored question 8. So that scoring was done by them. And so it's also a good reminder to yourself, oh yeah, I looked at this question already and I hand scored these myself for my students. And again, this is it's not necessarily the average, it's the average and not what percent got correct, because here it was out of 2 points with 0.92% as the average score for that one, meaning a little less than 50% got it correct, but otherwise, here 15% of the class got that item correct. So that's the reports that you get, and we actually have a protocol that will be linked in the documents that we're going to send along to you all, and actually link to this document of a way to go through this process, this data analysis process, because if you're testing 100 kids, this is a lot of information to be showing up on one page. So we've kind of created a protocol that we've found from a school here actually in California that's administering Smarter Balance. We've kind of adapted it for Montana and just has an idea. So we do provide ideas like that as well, because we know that looking at a whole giant student report can kind of be overwhelming.
Okay, had to unmute myself. So we've talked a lot about the hand scoring. That's where the teacher needs to go in and grade student responses for the performance tasks, and then also for some of the interim assessment blocks. And all of that hand scoring is done in the Airways reporting system. So the same place that we just showed you to go to get the reports, teachers have to log into that same place to go and do the hand scoring. And when the teacher logs in to their Airways reporting portal, they will see a yellow box, just like you see on your screen there, that says Test to Score. So then they need to click on the Test to Score, and that will lead them through into their roster and into exactly the place where they need to score those tests. Within the window, and we'll show you that on the next slide, but within the window they will see those rubrics. There are also exemplars provided for teachers so they can see exemplar responses and things like that. We also have a PowerPoint and some step-by-step how-tos to help guide teachers in this hand scoring, and we'll send those to you as well. Looks like Marissa's bringing that over. So here is the how to help teachers hand score interim assessments. And we have 2 of these step-by-steps. This one is the administrator support page, and the reason that we have divided it up by administrators and teachers for this particular hand scoring is because when administrators and teachers decide to administer these interim assessment blocks or the ICAs, they need to also plan time to grade and do the hand scoring. And so that's sort of where we remind administrators when they're starting to administer these interim assessments, make sure that they schedule time after the administration for teachers to sit together to start to do the hand scoring together. Practice doing a few of those first hand scoring items together as a group or with a partner, because that really will help teachers to get used to the rubric, to get used to the technology of the grading, and to sort of do some inter-rater reliability and make sure that they're actually sort of grading them according to the rubric and really sort of taking out, oh, that student did such a great job, I want to give them that extra point, but really they got a 1 and not a 2. And so just to have those conversations, I think is very helpful for teachers, and administrators need to know that going in to allow time for that grading to happen. And then we have the step-by-step for teachers on how to get in and do the hand scoring. So it just walks them through the steps. It shows them the different screens that they're going to see. And then when we get down to this last screen here, this is the screen where they'll actually be doing the grading for their students. And so it steps them right in there and gives them some helpful tips. And it also links to the user guide in case they have any other questions. And so that the how-to page is very helpful for teachers as well. And then this is the scoring screen that the teachers will see, and it's really pretty straightforward once they get to this point and they see their students. Right there, you see right at the top in the center is where the student name is. You can scroll the screen down a little to hide the student name. Sometimes teachers prefer to sort of grade without knowing what student response that is, and you can kind of hide that name. And you can see the drop down right here. It says points earned, and that's where you'll enter that score. And then on the left-hand side was the prompt or the stimulus that the students needed to read. On the right-hand side is their task, and then below that you would see their answer. And you would just see it all on one page here and enter the score under points earned. There are two tabs on this page, and so the teachers have to be on item and score in order to score the item. But if you click on the rubric and resources tab, that will bring them to the rubrics and some other resources, including I think the answer keys are in there as well. And this will allow teachers to know exactly what the rubric requirements are for this particular answer. So this is probably the easiest way for them to find out those answers and what that rubric is saying that the students needed to answer for that. So just remembering in this particular view there are two tabs for teachers, and showing them those two tabs has been helpful. But once teachers are in here and they're grading along, it starts to go, they get pretty efficient and they can move on item by item, so they can move through items, or they can move through student by student. It's their choice how they would prefer to grade that. All right, and we shared a public sample item earlier, and so there are the interim assessments are exactly what Marissa was saying earlier. They're for teachers and students to use, so it's perfectly acceptable for teachers to administer these interims. And then if there's a couple of questions that all the students in the class missed, they can project those in class, talk about them with the student, go over them. That is what these interim assessments are for. But the interim assessments are considered secure materials, and so they are not for really printing out and sending home for homework or sharing with the community or parents. They really are just for in-class instructional use. But sending items home for homework, sharing with the community members and parents what these items look like is very important, so that the parents know what these tests are like for their students. So there's a couple of places where you can get some more public-facing items that will help teachers communicate with parents. And the best place is the Smarter Balanced homepage. We have a screenshot of it right there. Anyone can access these items. They're public. They're sorted by grade, by subject area, or by claim. And this is a great place for teachers to go to screenshot, to use for homework, to guide parents to. Parents can work with their students on this interface. So it's just a great place to get those public items. And know that they're non-secure, so they can be shared freely. There are also, on our main Montcast homepage, there's a practice test and training test button. And on one of our previous slides, we actually had a line through it, because it seems that if you're doing an interim test, you would go to the practice and training test administration for teachers. It's like, oh, here's a practice test. I'm giving an interim practice test to my students. But actually, the practice test is really just that. It's just a practice test. It's a place where students can log in and practice the tools of the test, maybe finding where the calculator is or finding that highlighter, but the teacher will not get any data from this practice test. So if they want to really gather data, which if we're going to spend time administering an interim assessment to our students, we probably want to gather some data from that. So we just really guide teachers toward actually doing a real interim assessment. But you can pull some practice questions from this practice test and training and administration as well. Teachers can pull those questions, or have students in there, just practicing those technology tools as well. So that's another place to find some practice questions.
Yeah, one thing that I realized, Christy, that we hadn't brought up yet is that we definitely encourage either using the interim assessments as that practice one where you get the data at the end, or even these practice/training tests, particularly with our students who have received accommodations, to practice those accommodations ahead of time. These assessments, right, you can go ahead, you can sit next to the student, you can talk to them during it, it's particularly if they're testing out different accommodations, work through with that student during that time, and so that way they're really ready for that summative exam and have already figured out how to use all those tools. Again, right, this is optional for schools. They can choose how to use these interim assessments. And if you do have a student that you just kind of want to sit through and take a practice one together, that's totally fine. That's what these are for. These are there to help kids understand the platform as well, and for yourself to understand the platform. So we really find that these practices are really beneficial for figuring out technology components, and maybe just if you want to sit through a student and practice accommodations. But again, you don't get the results from the practice tests, which for me as an educator I'd be kind of frustrated with. So I decided that I'd probably rather do the interim assessments, and then if I needed to sit next to a kid and kind of help them, show them where different tools are, and talk through accommodations, that also works. But completely up to the school and how they want to do that. The last component, and again, this was that third piece of the summative balance, or the smarter balanced assessment system, is this formative practice. And the digital library is what Smarter Balance has created as their formative component. This is an archive of lesson plans, resources, activities, instructional videos for teachers who are part of the Smarter Balance Consortium, which every teacher here in Montana is. These items, to create an account for the digital library, you just need to have a Montana email, a Montana school email, I should say, and you can go ahead and create an account there. So teachers can just log in and create an account. It's different than their Montana portal login, of course, right? But it's a different, a login is just their Montana email, school email, and then whatever password they choose. And these lesson plans are created by different teachers from across all the different consortium states, or states that are part of the consortium. We actually have, Christy and I are going to kind of work on items for this digital library in 2 weeks from now, with 13 other teachers from Montana. So they'll see some items that you might recognize, a couple names of people who have worked on these items that you might recognize from the state, and this is all kind of a resource bank. So our recommendation of how to introduce either teachers or schools into the digital library is through the playlists. Again, there's a ton of resources in there for math, ELA, and there's a little bit for history and a little bit for science. But there's so many resources. So how would we encourage using them? We encourage using what they call the playlists. The playlists are directly linked to the interim assessment. So let's just say I finished my 7th grade ratio and proportions interim assessment. I gave it to my students, and I now want to go ahead and say, well, what should we do? Okay, now I've analyzed the data, and I'm like, all right, how am I going to reteach this? Or how am I going to hit this group of students that are still performing below standard with this material? This is where we have this ratio and proportion relationships playlists. They go ahead and list, above the standard, what were the kids actually meeting if they were above the standard, what kind of objectives, and links to, here's 3 different lesson plans that they recommend using that directly links to that interim assessment. So I might administer these, choose one of these to do with my students who are above standard. Here are the objectives that my kids who are at or near were about to meet. And here are 3 lesson plans or 4 lesson plans that might be worth doing with a group of students that are at or near that, who scored at or near on the interim assessment, and the same with below. So we really like this because they're really curated activities, lesson plans that teachers can go in and view and print and download and use as they see fit as part of their classroom practice. A lot of them have exit tickets associated with them. They have different kind of multi-resources kind of groups of practice. But that is where we'd recommend starting with that digital library, is checking out these interim assessment playlists. They've been working pretty hard on this, and so it's an ever-growing library, so things are kind of changing all the time in there. But these playlists are pretty solid in that they are really providing those next steps for schools after they've administered interim assessments and have gone through their results. Here, we just wanted to show you what we've provided for you. So we've gone through kind of a ton of information about interim assessments and kind of what that process is. How Christy and I have been, when schools that we've worked with in person, kind of grouped this out into these 3 components. All of this is going to be available on the Insight page. So if you're an OPI employee, we'll show you where those are if you're an OPI employee with access to Insight. I'll go ahead and pull up where you'll be able to find all these materials right now that are posted on the internal network. Take a second. It's under the OPI Insight. You're in our organization, and you just click on the assessment page. There it is, and it's under Interim Assessments, and this actually has all of the different these 3 different folders of how we would maybe do a professional development, a part 1, a part 2, and a part 3. And again, it has slides, resources, everything that we've shown you here of how to kind of walk either your staff or a curriculum director to, or a group of students to, or sorry, a group of teachers to. We also have them posted on Google that will kind of send to everyone who's on this chat today if you don't have access to the Insight page. Again, each part looks like this. Part 1 maybe is an hour training about what are interim assessments, kind of what we just presented to you all. How do you administer them? How do you choose which interims you want to administer? And also those user roles that you might need in order to administer them. Part 2 that we recommend then is after teachers have gone ahead, they've administered their first one, they're feeling good about it. This would be a half-hour PD on how do you actually hand score. So we've created a PowerPoint and 2 different support pages for teachers there on how do you hand score items. And we have a kind of a recommended, how would you teach this to a group of teachers who've never hand scored items before? How do we do, as Christy was talking about, that practice ones together so that we're norming our relatability or reliability, I'm trying to figure out what norming, how would we grade this student together in that practice. And then the last component is this, you've got interim data, now what? And that is probably a half-hour, 45-minute, actually, well, we just did up to 2-hour kind of professional development of, you've gotten all this data, how do I analyze it in airways? It can take your teachers through that interim assessment protocol of how do you kind of look at data, and then that next steps of using the digital library. So again, these will be resources that are given to you so that you can go ahead and do these with the schools that you work with, give them to the administration for schools that you work with, or go ahead and present it yourself. Is there any?
And the last,
yeah. Oh. No, go ahead. I was just saying if there's any questions about that or.
Yep.
What happened here? Okay. Great, Christy. Continue.
Yep. And I was just going to say the last thing we wanted to share with you is that Ashley in the assessment division has put together a request form for assessment professional development. And it's a way to sort of gather requests from schools, what professional development do they need. And I've put the link into the chat box for you. It was also available on that Insight page. But this request form is for schools to go in, and it's not just for interim assessments. Interim assessments are included, but it's for all of the state testing models, and there are different professional developments available and support. And so that request will come into the assessment division. The assessment division will look at it, analyze it, and get the answers and support to that school as needed.
So again, these were.
And,
oh yeah, go ahead, Christy. Yeah.
I was just going to say that we do have a webinar recording that will be available.
Again, we have these 3, those were our 3 objectives for today, and hopefully just have a better idea of what the balanced assessment system looks like for Smarter Balance for our grades 3 through 8 here in Montana, kind of some materials that you'll be able to use yourself if you're in a school, or you can go ahead and provide that school directly if they get questions. Again, our goal is really to disseminate this information to folks that are working with our schools directly, to make sure that as many as teach schools feel comfortable kind of jumping into using these if they so choose. Again, it's completely optional, but we see the value in using interim assessments and the curriculum on the content side, and really meeting grade level expectations, and seeing what do our standards really look like, and when it comes to these kind of high level, deeper thinking questions. So we will stay on the call for a little bit longer. Again, we noted that at the bottom of pretty much all of our handouts, we have our measured progress. This is the link to the vendor. These are the folks that if you need help making rosters, or you need help assigning different grade levels to students, or if you need help with all those different components, they do answer the phone, or you can go ahead and email them. We also have an OPI help desk for assessment. Again, this is a great place to start if you have other questions about what the assessments are offering, when are the assessments being offered, what are kind of any other questions that you need to ask assessment. They definitely are that help desk. You can either email them or call them. And then our contact information for myself and for Christy. We are always here to help when it comes to interim assessments, because we are full believers in using these as a real curricular resource for our schools here in Montana. For multiple reasons, as I hope you kind of gained from today. So we are going to kind of end the call now. If you have questions, we're going to stay on for the next couple of minutes, and feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or throw it into the chat box. But we thank you all for being here today, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, good. Perfect. So Marissa, I don't know if you can download the chat. Save
I
out
just
the chat.
copied and pasted it.
Copied and pasted.
And that way we have everyone's emails, and so we can just go ahead and shoot them an email with the links here.
Sounds good. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Lots of good thank yous there. Okay, good. All right, so you got that, and then
I'll go ahead and make a list of everyone who was just on the call for their emails that put into the chat box, and we'll send that along.
Yep.
Fun. You caught Jennifer's little clip in the middle of her lesson. Maybe you didn't. Still getting used to this schedule. Yeah, it's going to take a while. I'm not budging on this one. Yeah, they learn.
Okay. Well, I think we're good, Marissa.
Yep. If anyone has questions, let us know. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.